Hi there. 2, 3, 4. Do 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 do. Of a headache. Do, 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 da, da. Ba 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 ba. Hi, it's Wednesday and I have a headache. This is Picks of the Week. Ba da ba da ba da. A light week. Gosh, I've missed those. No, I've been a little. I don't know why I need to give myself a rundown on how broke I am every fucking time I do this. Oh, I'm not supposed to be smiling. Um, edit that out. But suffice it to say that it was a bit of a lighter week this week, and I'm grateful for that. Also, because, gosh, I tell you, and it's not for the first time this has occurred to me, but I never need to buy anything to read ever again. And yet, I get comic books weekly, I get monthly, or every other month, I get this magazine of fantasy and science fiction. I mean, I constantly am checking out books from the library and stuff. But I have been making some headway um, on my to read stack. It's slow going, but it's getting there, especially with the Cerebus. But we'll get to that. Yeah, I've quit social media for good, which is a load off my mind, and I just don't watch that much TV these days, except for Seinfeld, which I've been watching. I've seen a million times. But yeah, like I'm trying to just read more, and I think I'm gonna get these thousands of books read. Anyway, so first up this week, speaking of Seinfeld, Maestro: World War M #1. This is, I think, the final miniseries in Peter David's Future Imperfect series. So back in the early '90s, I want to say it was, yeah, maybe even the mid '90s. Long time veteran Peter David. Well, yeah, I guess he'd been around for a while by this time. One of Peter David's first big things that I remember anyway was his run on the Incredible Hulk. Partially because I think um, that was Todd McFarlane's the first thing that Todd McFarlane did that people sat up and took notice of. But Peter David was writing that before he came along, and he was writing it long after he had left. I want to say it was in the early '90s. He did a 2-issue prestige format miniseries called Hulk and Future Imperfect, wherein the Hulk. I feel like I must have run this down because I feel like I've talked about this recently, somewhat recently, where the Hulk finds himself in the far flung future somehow. I forget how exactly. And this was at a time when the Hulk had Banner's brain, so he was the Hulk, but he was able to talk and reason. Finds himself in a dystopian future and comes to find out that his future self is ruling the land with an iron fist, and he goes by Maestro. That's like the big reveal, I think, at the end of the first issue. They're like, "Oh, no, the Maestro," and then it turns out it was the Hulk. It was a very popular a very popular little series. I love it. I bought it. I mean, I think I had it in reprints, and I was able to finally put my hand to it about 10 or 12 years ago at Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con, and I was pretty pleased about that. But it's that thing I'm realizing now, working in a shop, especially working with the back issues and having to price the books, which I'd never done before really, that a lot of books that used to be very valuable when I was younger are not worth anything. There's like the obvious ones, like I knew that the death of Superman Volume 2, number 75, was not going to be worth much in the future, and I was right. But there's a lot of books that people just lost interest in. And I think Future Perfect was one of them. But when I bought it, I was still very happy to have it. Then, just a few years ago, I think, yeah. Okay, so if I remember this right, I don't. Peter David revisited that character at least one other time, I want to say. And then this was really fun. Back in like 2017, when they had given Old Man Logan his own series, because in the now what they call the Wastelanders universe, the Hulk had also turned evil in a future dystopia, but it was a different evil Hulk in a future dystopia. But the Maestro does show up in that one, which I was like, oh, that's fun. You got two dystopian Hulks, although I don't think they met. Um, and then they did. I think from that they were like, oh, let's do another. So they did this. The first one was just called Maestro. The second one was called War and Pax, and now this is World War M. And I believe this is the last one. I think it's being touted as the last one. And I think it's also he fights the Defenders, which he was a founding member of the Hulk. I know for sure that's Namor, but it also looks like Abomination and Human Torch, who were not Defenders. That might not even be the Human Torch, though. These future dystopias get very nuts. I love it. And my boss makes fun of me, but I don't care. Also this week, Secret X-Men #1. Voice down. It's written by Tini Howard, who is writing Excalibur, and is very good. And this is a Lionel Yu cover, but he's not drawn the interior. So this is like another sort of X-Force, I believe, like a kind of a Black Ops X-Men, but they're off planet. I think they have to go to the Shi'ar universe. The Shi'ar universe is, or Shi'ar galaxy, right? It's a whole galaxy, or is it just a system of planets? But regardless, the Shi'ar Empire, as it's known throughout the universe, is very large, avian-based empire, and they've always been very closely linked with the X-Men. Back in the 70s, early 80s, there was a big, long space opera that Chris Claremont did, wherein we met the Starjammers and the Shi'ar Empire and all that stuff. And so they often come up in the X-Men books. So there's some trouble on Shi'ar, or Chandalar, which is the home world. So you have Armor, you have Strong Guy, one of my favorites, Banshee, who's only recently been resurrected, Forge, Boom Boom, who I also love. Never remember this goddamn character. What is her name? I was gonna say Husk, but that's Cannonball's sister. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'll correct myself in the comments at one point. But the main attraction for me is the reuniting of Sunspot and Cannonball, who were both on the New Mutants, founding members of the New Mutants, and were buddies. And I really like buddies. I like buddy cop movies and stuff like that. Booster Gold and Blue Beetle are another example. It's not like a Batman and Robin thing. It's their two guys. So Sunspot and Cannonball are a very fun duo. Jonathan Hickman used them a lot in his Avengers run, and yeah, so that's why that's a pick of the week. And now there's a movie. Blah blah blah. Yeah, I mentioned Cerebus, so you better buckle up. I don't know why you're not in a collar. But before we get to that, first up, last week I read Peacemaker: Disturbing the Peace #1. This was fun. This was like what I expected. It's a bit of a it's something to sell people who have watched the television show and or the movie of last year. But it was fine, and it's a very Garth Ennis thing. The Peacemaker is a former military guy who's become like a Black Ops guy for the Suicide Squad, which is like the ultimate Black Ops team in the DC universe. And of course, he suffered much trauma over the years. I don't know how much of this is Ennis's invention. I don't know how much of. I mean, it's all his. He's writing it, but I don't know if it's retconning a previous origin of the Peacemaker, adding to that origin, or if it's the first time his origin has been told. Until he was in that film, I don't even think I knew who that character was until the movie. But it was good. It was very much. Ennis is very comfortable with these sorts of vigilante, ex-military guys. The Punisher is the biggest example, obviously. But The Boys, Billy Butcher was ex-military, and a psycho. God, was the Hitman? I think the Hitman. Yeah, Hitman was ex-military. It's a very comfortable subject for him, and also Gary Brown's art is also really good. But if you were to like put a gun to my head, I wouldn't put up a fight for it. Why you say it that way? Also read Fantastic Four: Reckoning War Alpha, which I also really liked. I think this is going to be like a fifth week book. Oh, and this is Nick Fury, which I did not recognize that. I'd forgotten they. This was when he was the Unseen. So back during the original Sin event, the Watcher dies at the beginning of that, and then at the end of it, Nick Fury kind of replaces him on the moon as the Watcher, but he's called the Unseen. The irony being, of course, that he only has one eye. Now, recently, Uatu came back from the dead. I don't remember how exactly, but since that What If show on Disney Plus is on, they're like, well, we have to put him back. And so Nick Fury is when he was the Unseen, he was like this very, very much like the character Destiny from the Sandman books, where he was like, oh, and lo these mortals and that sort of thing. But now he's back to being kind of a gruff, all right, you lunkheads, like that sort of character. But now he's kind of like the Watcher's assistant. The very beginning of this, I think I mentioned it during when I was talking about Timeless. The moon blows up, and it's apparently a direct reference to the Mr. Show sketch. No, it's not. But it's fun. And somehow it's all She-Hulk's fault, which is something else that he alluded to back during his She-Hulk. Writer Dan Slott alluded to back during his She-Hulk run. But I don't know. I don't see how that's coming to pass yet exactly. But yeah, it's good. It's a big Fantastic Four event, and I'm always on board for that. I also read The Excellent #1, which was I forgot to mention last week when I was giving the rundown on Ecstatics that another aspect of it, I mentioned the reality show part. I'm pretty sure they all become celebrities, but they also die all the time. So they kill them off, and more so than in normal superhero comics, and they never, if ever, come back, which is a fun kind of twist on the old superhero thing. So the Ecstatics, or now the Excellent, there's a new Ecstatics that they're enemies with, and it's good. It's Mike Allred, it's Peter Milligan. I got no complaints. This was something else. This was actually I don't want you guys to think I'm cheating on you, but aside from doing this every week, I also, for the comic shop, there's a weekly newsletter that goes out, and the four of us who work there, including the owner, write a recommendation for the week, and this was mine for the previous week, even though I didn't talk about it. This is Sabretooth #1. This is really, I love Sabretooth. Is he a low-rent Wolverine? Yes, and that's why I like him. They've always had an incredible rivalry. When I was a kid, Wolverine #10 came out, and that ended up being a huge issue. That's still a pretty big issue. I have it. And that's where he first kills Silver Fox, who's Wolverine's Native American lady friend. Which he did every year on Wolverine's birthday. Sabretooth kills somebody close to him. It's a touching tradition, and they have a big fight. Or maybe he just killed Silver Fox, and then every year they fight over it. It's very much a woman in the refrigerator sort of thing, but it's of my childhood, so I enjoy it. In this series, Sabretooth, and I think it'll just end up being a mini, but Sabretooth is essentially, okay, so, and I think I might have said as much. When Charles Xavier and Magneto formed the nation of Krakoa, they were able to resurrect all the dead mutants, which the world at large does not know they have the power to resurrect people. And that was the deal, was like, we're going to give you all a utopia to live in. And so even like the most villainous mutants like Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister were like, yeah, I mean, you're a mutant, you're allowed here. I mean, you're not allowed to fight, though. That's the thing, is that Sabretooth, not that kind of a guy. But I think he ends up getting thrown in the pit, which is Krakoa's version of hell. So he's still alive, so he can't be resurrected, but he's also, he's immobile, he can't move. But of course he escapes because he's Sabretooth. And yeah, he's become like the ultimate Black Ops guy. I think they threw him in the pit in the first place because he killed somebody that they actually told him like in secret. I could be misremembering that. But regardless, it's like another. Honestly, it's more of a badass sort of Wolverine story. But Wolverine stories lately have not been super badass, if I'm being honest. So that's another. I just wanted to shit on Benjamin Percy's work again. If he's never going to see this, but I do enjoy his work. I'm just being a goof. And now, the main event for picks of last week: the next two chapters of Cerebus. We have Reeds and Minds in that order, and these were a lot quicker to go through. I'm a little like in hindsight anyway. I never really had considered this before, but the phone books get considerably skinnier in the second half, which is whatever. And I'm not trying to suggest that Dave was trying to like squeeze more money out of anybody. I think he just wanted to make not such a like an actual phone book. I mean, they got that name because they were ridiculously thick. These are not quite so much, but I kind of liked how they looked on my shelf. The first four are like super thick. The third one especially is ridiculous. I digress. This is the departure point. This was when I read this entire arc as it was being published, and then I bailed. It wasn't just because of this arc. I think I was also just buying fewer comics. And actually, come to think, I might have bought a few issues of Minds. But by the time Minds was coming out, I want to say this was in the 95, 96, when I was definitely not buying as many comics. Yeah. And, okay, how do I want to go about this? So, okay, so Reeds is, a lot of people jumped off on Reeds. Reeds is Dave's attempt to satirize the publishing industry and to discuss creativity and what it means. And he really ties it into the battle of the sexes, more so than I think is necessary. But I realized reading it that I think I'm older than Dave was when he was doing this. Not that I'm not trying to make excuses for him, although I definitely am a Dave Sim apologist in a lot of ways. Not that he needs me to do that. I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason a lot of people jumped off on it is because a lot of it, and I think I pointed this out. I don't know. I guess I haven't. It's a lot of it's text, so there's not nearly as many. There's still comic book pages, but it's a lot of text. And let's see how many issues it is. This comprises 11 issues, maybe. Yeah, 11 issues of Cerebus, and fully more than half of them are text. I think the final issue is mostly text. And it gets very meta. So the text parts, like, so, okay. I guess I'm not really doing a full recap of everything, but so I don't need to say. But at this point in the story, Cerebus and Siren finally have it's been building to them fighting, and in the midst of that, they begin to ascend again. There's a lot of ascending going on in Cerebus. And in Church and State, he ascended to the moon, and he met the judge, who was more or less omnipotent, and is revealed to be Tarim, who is God in Cerebus world, and Starchion. And then, because it's like, it was implied, and then he's like, no, it's not really Tarim, but now, I think in this one, he more or less is like, yeah, it's Tarim. But in this one, they go past the moon to all the way to the end of the solar system to Pluto. Or at least Siren, I think Siren only makes it to Mars. That's in Minds, now that I'm thinking about it. Sorry, again, getting ahead of myself. In Reeds, the text begins as the story of Victor Reed, who is a writer in Upper Felda, I want to say, in ES, which is like the main city in which most of these stories take place. And he's kind of a hack, and he wants to do something more like bigger and important. And so these publishers are like wooing him, and there's a lot of very thinly very thin analogs of actual publishers. A lot of real inside baseball stuff, but that's the kind of book Cerebus was, especially by this point. Cerebus was always like an underground-ish alternative book, but always very meta, always very aware that it's a comic book and satire. It started out as a parody of Conan comic. So Victor Reed we follow his sort of journey as he becomes like a sellout, basically, and then that's abandoned. And then we meet Victor Davis, who is Victor Reed is definitely Dave, but then Victor Davis is even more Dave. Dave's middle name is Victor, so Victor Davis. And who is Victor Davis? Oh, Victor Davis is that's Victor Reed. I'm trying to remember why he brings Victor Davis into it all, aside from being Victor Davis is a character in the world. No, Victor Davis is Dave. Yeah, that's right. Okay, right. At one point, so here you see Cerebus and Siren are fighting, and then we pull back and we see Dave. This is Dave. He's drawn the book. And then we have Victor Davis. So Victor Davis becomes Dave Sim. Or Dave Sim becomes Victor Davis. So he's talking directly to the reader as Victor Davis, and he's constantly referring to him. It's in the third person, but he's still talking directly to the reader. Like I said, very meta. Because then the reader becomes a character. And it's, obviously it's supposed to be whoever's reading it. And I remember reading it when I was in high school, and I was so confused that I was impressed. It's like, wow, he's doing really smart stuff. In hindsight, now as an older guy, I go, well, I think for one thing, autobiographical comics, especially in the alternative press in the 90s, were huge. You had the big three, it was Joe, Matt, Seth, and, what's his goddamn name? Chester Brown. They did Peep Show, Palookaville, and Yummy Fur, respectively. And they were just comics they were all Canadian. And they were all friends with Dave, I think, at the time. They were just young, they were like in their 20s. And so they did comics about their own lives, and everybody loved them. They were very big, and they were far from the only one. There was a bunch, like Optic Nerve, more or less became that. A lot of Jeff Levine stuff and No Hope became autobiographical. It was a very Gen X thing to just be like up their own ass. And I mean, I was old enough to be part of the generation, but too young to really participate, which is for the best. So in hindsight, like, it was blowing my mind when I was a kid, but in hindsight, I'm like, this wasn't any different than what anybody else was doing, except that it was much more aware. Like, Peep Show was like, hi, I'm Joe Matt, and here's some cartoons about my life. This stuff was Dave talking directly to the reader and directly to the reader about what he was doing. And then it gets all into men versus women, which is a subject that Dave has got a lot of opinions on, that he's hard and fast and unyielding on. And, okay. I mean, if I were reading it, if I had never heard of this guy and I was just reading this now, I think I would probably think he was like a full of shit blowhard. Although, if I had read now from the beginning to here, I think I would still enjoy Cerebus enough to give him the benefit of the doubt. Because I'm beginning to realize, not for the first time really, but really cementing in my head how much I love Cerebus. It's one of my favorite comics of all time. And Dave Sim was, for better or for worse, and trust me, there was some worse in there, hugely influential on how I viewed the world for years. Well after I'd stopped even reading Cerebus, and well after Cerebus was even being published. Like, a lot of Dave's opinions on sexism and the patriarchy that she doesn't believe in and stuff like that, I fully ingested and made my own. Not all of them, I don't even think then, but reading it again, I was like, oh, that's where I got that from. The main problem with it for me is that it's just too black and white. And Dave is definitely that kind of guy. And he only becomes more that guy as time goes on. So it's kind of a drag, But the thing of it is, I was expecting to get to reads and remember why I stopped reading Cerebus, and that's not happened. When I got to reads and I was like, oh, I wish I had stuck with this. I was definitely too young to really know what was going on, but now as what passes for a man, I can tell you. And then what he does in Minds gets even more um, metafictional. Cerebus, like I say, they're ascending. They go past the moon. They go to Mars, and Siren kind of gets dropped off there. And and Cerebus goes further. He goes past Jupiter and Saturn, all the planets you got. And my very educated mother, Dave himself, not Victor Davis, not Victor Reed, but Dave shows up, and he shows up in Cerebus's own mind. So Cerebus is in the middle of, he's just seeing these planets go by, and Dave starts talking to him directly. And the way he puts it in the intro is that I don't really want to try to put words in his mouth, but he does get to a point where Dave in the book, he tells Cerebus all this stuff about himself. He's like, I'm your creator, and I'm not Tarim or Tarim or any other Clovis or any other gods that are mentioned in this. He goes, I'm Dave, and I created you. And he proves it, very, very Vonnegut, very Breakfast of Champions. And which, if you haven't read, I highly recommend. And then he gets to a point where he goes, okay, your turn. And then he says in the intro, he said when he got to that point, he really didn't know where the book was going to go. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew how it was going to end, but he really didn't know he was kind of just giving it over to Cerebus again. And so if I remember right, Cerebus' first thing is he wants Jaka back. And they get into the whole thing about how Cerebus doesn't actually love Jaka. And even though Jaka's always been his one true love, that he's not. Because basically Cerebus is a piece of shit. He's a bad guy. He's not a good person. He's greedy and short-sighted and violent and a rapist, and he tries to soften that, but he's definitely a rapist. But I couldn't put it down. Also, by the time you get to Minds, it's a lot quicker of a read because it's a lot more comics. There is still some text, but not nearly as much. And man, did I really enjoy it. I'm fine. I never had gotten to read the whole thing. And now I really am. And now I'm even more excited because Guys is the next arc, which I have read. I went and read Guys, even though I hadn't read Cerebus in years, and I was completely out of context, but it was one of the funnier books. Like, I could just kind of tell from looking at it. Because in Guys, if I remember right, Cerebus is back in Astartion, and under Siren's rule, under the Sirenist rule, taverns are still like there's no dancing is allowed, really no fun basically, and the men are considered just seed dispensers. So, and they're not good for anything else. So they're allowed to go to taverns and drink. They're not allowed to leave unless they're sober, but they can live there if they want, and they can get as drunk as they want for as long as they want. But they can't really do anything else. So that's kind of they're like, all right, once they impregnate it. Once they make a woman into a mother, then they can just go get hammered for the rest of their lives. And they do. So Guys takes place in one of these taverns. And so it has Cerebus, and then like Bear comes back, and the McGrew brothers come back, and then I'm pretty sure Mick and Keefe, Prince Keefe, who are based on the Glimmer Twins, the Rolling Stones. And then I believe the Beatles also show up in Guys. And the way that was it's always been my absolute favorite thing about Dave's work is his ear for dialects. And so it's always phonetically spelled out their accents and stuff. So when he gets a hold of a Liverpudlian accent, it's so much fun. So I'm really looking forward to Guys. It'll be here soon. So I have Guys, and then I have Rick's story, which I haven't read, and that's going to be a bummer, I think, because Rick was Jaka's husband. So we had Jaka's story a few arcs ago. Now we have Rick's story. And then Going Home, which is in 2 phone books. And then Latter Days, which is also. So I only have 6 more books to read. And I'll have read all of Cerebus in essentially one sitting. Obviously not one sitting. But. So yeah. I still love Cerebus. I will still apologize for Dave, even though he doesn't need me to, and nobody's asking me anyway. I mean, I will concede that he's very wrong about a lot of things. But like I said, or I think I've said, I keep expecting to get to a point where I don't like Cerebus, or where I stop liking Cerebus. Yet to reach that. The real test will be latter days, because latter days is when he really gets super, super duper religious, and not like your aunt. Like he, I think I don't know if I've mentioned this, but he prays every. He gets up at 5 a.m. and he prays every morning, and he names all 400 saints. He thanks them, and he hasn't memorized. He printed it in the back of an issue of Cerebus once, and I went, "Oh, okay, he's a crazy, crazy for God." Again, we'll get into that. Oh, good, another half hour. All right, thanks, Dave. Seriously,